Hi, my name is Colin Thomas, and today we're going to be talking about the Orange Crush 35 LDX and Fender Frontman 212R amplifiers, two normal, even market combo amps. We're going to talk about the amplifiers and the recording process. Before we start the tutorial video, we're going to talk about the equipment that was used to make sure that this was a controlled experiment. We used a Digidesign 003 Rack Plus unit and an AKG C214 and Shure SM57 microphone to record the amps. All the cables, guitars, and microphones that we used were the same. Let's look at the size of the amps. The Orange amp is 15 by 17 by 9 inches and weighs about 25 pounds, and the Fender Frontman is 26 by 20 by 10 inches and weighs about 48 pounds. Since this is not something that you can easily picture in your head, let's compare it to a 5-foot 6-inch girl. There you go. That's a little bit easier to picture. Now let's take a look at the specs for the Orange amp. The Orange amp is 35 watts and has one 10-inch speaker. There are 16 built-in digital effects on the Orange Crush amp, and it also has a 3-band EQ. There is also an overdrive section and an onboard tuner. There are a lot of things on this amplifier that we're not going to use for the purpose of this video but are worth noting, like the headphones, the overdrive pedal, and the aux input. We also, for the sake of this video, want to make sure that the FX level knob is turned all the way down so we're only recording clean signal. If you take a look at the right side of the amp, again there are a couple things worth noting that we're not going to use, like the overdrive section and the tuner. When you're getting ready to record, you want to make sure that you plug your guitar into the input on the far right end of the amp, and your direct out is going to be plugged into the line out section. You want to make sure that both of your microphones are pointed at the center of the one speaker, and that both of them are also equidistant from the amp. Now, let's take a look at the Pro Tools session and listen to these recordings. Here we are in Pro Tools. As you can see, we have the SM57, the AKG C214, and the direct out of the Orange amp all lined up one on top of each other. We're going to listen to each one of them simultaneously, and every single time we get through the repeated phrase once, we're going to solo the next section, or the next recording, rather, of the track. Once we do that, we're going to be able to compare both the SM57 and the AKG microphone along with the direct output of the Orange amp. Let's take a listen to the SM57. Here's the AKG. And this is the direct output of the amp. As you probably noticed right away, the direct out of the amp is a lot tonier and has a lot brighter of a sound. That gives it that punchy guitar chord strumming tone that you're used to in guitar tracks. The AKG was much warmer than the SM57, but the Orange amp output is overall very, very warm when it's going through that 135 watt speaker. Now let's take a look at the Fender Frontman 212R amplifier. This amp is a 100 watt amp and has two 12-inch speakers instead of just the one in the Orange amp. This also has a 3-band equalizer and an adjustable drive section with its own separate equalizer. There's also an adjustable reverb, and this amp has two inputs instead of one. Here we take a look at the input section. Here, like I said, there are two inputs, and this is also your volume knob and your equalizer. This section, much like in the Orange amp, is going to be one that we're not going to be using, but is worth noting with the adjustable drive and the reverb. Here you see the three outputs, the foot switch, the pre-out, and the power in. The pre-out is the one that we're going to be using for this experiment. So you want to plug into input 1 with your guitar, and your output is going to come out of that pre-out output switch. Again, you want to make sure that both of your microphones are equidistant from the amp, but since there are two equal speakers, they can each be pointed at the center of separate speakers. Let's take a look at the Pro Tools session and compare how this sounds. This section is going to be completed the same way that it was with the orange amp, with us soloing each section, the SM57, the AKG, and the direct out, one by one, while we listen to each one of them and compare. Here's the SM57. This is the AKG. And here's the direct out of the Fender amp. Something that's worth noting right off the bat is that the Fender amp overall has a lot brighter of a sound than the orange amp does. There's less difference between the microphones and the direct output of the amp. However, something that I also noticed right away is that the direct output of the Fender amp came out much quieter than the direct out of the orange amp. That made me have to add a little bit of gain to the direct out of the Fender amp to make it equal volume, which made it a little bit hissy. Something to think about if you're recording your Fender Frontman amp. I want to thank you guys very much for watching this video that compared the Orange 35 LDX amplifier and the Fender Frontman 212R. Something worth noting about these amps that may not have been made clear earlier is that both of them have very similar market values. The orange amp is currently marketed for the price of $250, while the Fender Frontman 212R amp, when it was still on the market, was marketed for about $300. So there's a lot of variability in the type of amps that you can get for the money, especially when you're looking at decent sized and decent output combo amps like this one. With two relatively common microphones, I was able to record 3 separate but good sounding guitar takes that could be mixed to my advantage to get the guitar sound that I want.